Quick question. Do you have a plan in case you need to pay for an unexpected expense? Most Americans can't afford to pay $1,000 for an emergency. And I know from experience that it's not really better elsewhere. If you want to make sure that you're in a good financial position if something unexpected happens, then keep watching. Okay, so first, let's talk about what could happen. What kind of unexpected expenses could you run into? If you live in a country without free healthcare, you could end up having to pay for a medical emergency. Or if you live in a country that offers universal coverage, something that is not covered could come up. You could have to pay for a repair in your house, things like your furnace breaking, electrical issues, a pipe bursting, or a leak in the roof. What if your car breaks down? Or if you get into an accident? Even with insurance, you could have to pay for deductible. What if you forget to like this video? You could get caught by the YouTube police, and this could end up being very expensive. If you have a pet, there's a lot of health complications that can come up. And we're talking hundreds to thousands of dollars here. Or if you have a family that lives far away from you, you might want or need to go visit them unexpectedly. Some joyful events, like weddings, are usually predictable ahead of time. But if you have to go to a funeral, it will probably be unexpected. And this is just the common stuff. I'm sure you know someone that has some kind of unforeseen event happen to them and they could never have seen it coming in 1,000 years. But if I can make a long list of unexpected expenses, how hard is it really to predict? Of course, you can't know when one of these things is going to happen, but we all know that at some point something is bound to happen. You may not know what, when, where, but you know that at some point it's going to happen, it's coming, and it's going to cost you. So why not plan for it? Expect the unexpected and you'll never be surprised. So how do we prepare for something like this? The short answer is to build an emergency fund. The end. Thanks for watching. You're welcome. Hey, not so fast. Let me give you a more helpful answer, without all the complicated details, because this is how we like our financial information. Simple and easy to put into action. And if you like that, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and you'll never miss anything. So the goal of this emergency fund is not really to make you feel safe, because you would need a huge amount of money to be ready for every single possible thing that can happen in life. Instead, an emergency fund will help you in a few different ways. First, it will make your day-to-day and month-to-month money management way more practical. What I mean by that is that you'll be able to pay for all of your expenses throughout the month without having to manage how much money you have in your bank account at all time. Of course, you'll need to make sure that you don't overspend by keeping track of your expenses and doing simple budgeting. Second, it will help you to make sure that you don't get into too much trouble if something happens. It may help you to stay out of debt, so that a bad situation is not going to get even worse by putting a drag on your financial future. You will be glad not to add financial stress on top of an emergency that is already stressful in itself. Of course, like I said before, you can't plan for everything. Some expenses are going to cost more than what you have, and it's okay. What's important is that you won't be caught completely unprepared. And third, you'll be able to save more to be able to invest on top of what you already have in your emergency fund. These investments will add to your ability to face unexpected circumstances while setting you up for success on your future projects. And this leads me to talk about something that most people completely ignore when they talk about emergency fund. Even financial advisors like Dave Ramsey. How much you need in an emergency fund depends not only on your spending habits, but also on 3 other very important factors. The typical advice you'll hear about how much money you need in your emergency fund is something like 3 to 6 months worth of expense. That's what Dave Ramsey and many others suggest. It's not terrible advice, but it completely ignores the fact that everyone's life is different. People have different habits, different ways of living, and different circumstances. Your job stability will make a difference, and so will the number of different incomes that you and your spouse have. On top of that, your life situation will make a big difference on how flexible you can be in case something happens. For example, if your spending is already well under control, plus you have children, then you won't have a lot of flexibility on how much you're spending, even in the case of something very exceptional happening. But on the other hand, if half of what you're spending is stuff that you could cut in case of emergency, then it's a totally different story. You might not want to cut that spending, but you could if you really had to. The other thing that is often ignored is how much money you have in liquid assets. When I say liquid asset, I mean that you could sell that asset at any time, quite quickly, and without penalty. So real estate doesn't count, nor does your retirement account, unless you can withdraw from it without penalty at any time. The reason that I think that this has an impact on how much money you need in an emergency fund is because you can basically consider your liquid investments as an emergency fund. It's not ideal, but if you have to choose between putting $10,000 on your credit card at 20% per year or withdraw $10,000 from your investment account, then you're better avoiding the crazy interest rates of a credit card. The point is that if you spend, let's say, $4,000 per month on various expenses and you want 6 months worth of expense as your emergency fund, then that means you need $24,000 in cash. If instead you get $4,000 in cash, but you invested $20,000, you would end up with about $1,400 per year extra, because let's say you have a 7% return on your investment. So considering that it's unlikely that you'll need to spend the whole $24,000 on an emergency, you might want to keep part of that amount invested and the rest in cash. And this strategy is even better if you're diversified in your investments. Investments in the stock market are usually the most liquid, but if you can think creatively, you could use real estate as a source of money that is fairly liquid. Yes, I know I said that real estate doesn't count, because you're not going to sell a property just because you have an emergency. But what you could do is borrow money against the equity that you've built up in that property, if you have enough to allow it. Borrowing on a home equity line of credit is going to be way cheaper than borrowing on your credit card. And plus, you're probably going to make more money from the stock market by leaving your investments in the stock market than what you're going to pay in interest on that line of credit. I know it's getting technical here, but the simple version is this. If you have $20,000 in cash, it's costing you about $1,400 every year if you compare it to having this money invested at a return of 7%, which is very reasonable. That's some very expensive insurance. It's like if you told me that you're keeping $7,000 at 20% interest rate on a credit card just in case. I would rather use my investments as backup in case something happens than to have so much money in cash that I lose money every year by not having that money invested. And the last thing that is usually ignored is that the fraction of your income that you save every month will have an impact on how much of an emergency fund you need. It doesn't make a lot of difference for some people, but if you're saving a large portion of your income, then it's going to be significant. Let's take, for example, someone that makes $6,000 per month, but only spends $3,000. That person doesn't need as big of an emergency fund, because the $3,000 per month that they usually save could be used if there was an emergency. Of course, that's not going to help if the emergency is losing your job, but for everything else, it works. So how are you going to build an appropriate emergency fund? The answer is very simple. You need to save money every month until you have enough. Obvious, right? Just make it a habit. Every month, save some money and you'll have your emergency fund in no time. And you can save faster by saving every windfall that you receive, because it's money that you didn't budget for. So turn this extra money into extra savings. Saving and investing a larger portion of your income will grow your wealth at an impressive rate. Plus, it's also going to help you keep your emergency fund lean while still having the safety net of a large one. We will go deeper on investments in a future video, so subscribe and hit the notification bell to make sure you don't miss those videos. Let me know in the comments below if you already have your emergency fund, and if you don't, tell me if you're going to start working on it now. So here's my suggestion for more content on how to save money and YouTube has its own suggestion. So enjoy and have a good day.